In the quiet town of Washington, Utah, a young man named Tyler Robinson sat in his room late at night, the glow of his computer screen casting shadows across his face. He was 22, unremarkable to anyone who might pass him on the street, yet increasingly consumed by a world he could no longer ignore, a world of political fervor, online ideologies, and grievances he could not contain. For months, he had immersed himself in forums, social media feeds, and heated debates, the kind that spiral into obsession without anyone noticing. In his solitude, the line between thought and action had begun to blur. Thousands of miles away, Charlie Kirk, a 29-year-old conservative activist and public figure, was preparing to address a crowd at Utah Valley University. It was September 10, 2025, a day that seemed ordinary to anyone glancing at the calendar. The late summer air carried a calmness that belied the storm about to descend. Hundreds, soon to become thousands, would gather to hear Kirk speak about mass shootings, political trends, and youth engagement. To them, it was an opportunity to learn, to be inspired, or perhaps to rally around ideas that mattered. To Robinson, watching from afar, it was something else entirely, a moment he had been anticipating with a quiet intensity that was as chilling as it was invisible. The campus hummed with the energy of expectation. Students and attendees filled seats, clustered in groups, chatting nervously about the day ahead. Cameras flashed, banners waved, and volunteers hustled to ensure everything ran smoothly. Charlie Kirk, unaware of the danger looming above, stepped onto the stage, radiating his usual confidence. His words flowed, measured yet passionate, resonating with a crowd that had come for clarity, engagement, and perhaps inspiration. At that very moment, high above the audience on a rooftop, Tyler Robinson was already in position. A Mauser .30-06 bolt-action rifle rested in his hands, a weight that matched the gravity of the act he was about to commit. The distance, roughly 142 yards, was no obstacle. The preparation, the thought, the intent, all pointed toward an outcome that would shatter lives in a single, unfathomable instant. No one could have predicted that the bullet, fired with chilling precision, would strike the stage and take from the world a man who had spent years cultivating influence, shaping political discourse, and inspiring youth across the nation. Chaos erupted in the crowd as screams filled the air, people ducking and scattering, confusion and terror mingling in a single, horrifying moment. The media would later describe it as instantaneous pandemonium, yet those who were there would forever remember the slow-motion horror of realizing what had happened, the disbelief that anyone could commit such a violent, deliberate act in a place meant for learning, discussion, and growth. Authorities, responding quickly, sealed the campus and began piecing together the immediate aftermath. It took hours of painstaking investigation to identify the suspect, but the trail led quickly to Tyler Robinson. Surveillance footage captured him fleeing the scene, and a family member's report about his unusual behavior tipped investigators toward his location. Within 33 hours of the shooting, Robinson was in custody, the weight of his actions pressing down on the reality that nothing would ever be the same again, for the victims, the families, the students who witnessed it, and a nation forced to confront the terrifying fragility of public safety in an era of polarization. The investigation revealed disturbing details. Bullet casings engraved with anti-fascist messages littered the rooftop, a grotesque signature that suggested a politically motivated act. Law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, would confirm that Robinson acted alone, yet the ripple effects of his actions were felt nationwide. For a society already grappling with ideological divisions, the shooting was a harsh reminder of what happens when grievances metastasize unchecked and online radicalization fuels real-world violence. Psychologists and political analysts alike would later dissect the path that led Robinson from ordinary young man to perpetrator of a politically charged assassination, highlighting a trajectory of isolation, obsession, and distorted purpose. Yet the story extends beyond the immediate violence. To understand what happened, one must examine the forces that shape both the observer and the participant. Tyler Robinson, though singular in his actions, represents a broader, troubling trend: the susceptibility of youth to radicalization through digital platforms, the echo chambers of social media that reinforce extreme beliefs, and the allure of ideological purity that can justify horrific behavior. Charlie Kirk, in contrast, symbolizes the very public stage that can both inspire and provoke, a reminder that in today's world, influence carries immense responsibility, and immense risk. The collision of these two lives, separated by miles but connected by circumstance, created a narrative that challenges the nation to reflect on safety, discourse, and the ethical responsibilities of both public figures and private citizens. As authorities worked to unravel the immediate details of the attack, the media and the public demanded answers. Why would a young man, educated, employed, and seemingly unremarkable, turn to violence? How could a community of students, parents, and educators reconcile the ordinary calm of a September day with the extraordinary violence that had unfolded? These questions, though widely debated, are not easily answered. The investigation illuminated fragments: Robinson's engagement with online communities that fostered hostility toward political figures, the intensity of his fixation on Kirk, and the calculated nature of the attack. Yet even with this information, a deeper understanding remains elusive, the kind of understanding that forces a society to ask uncomfortable questions about the environment in which its youth are raised, the influences they absorb, and the guidance they are provided. For the audience who watched, for the families affected, and for a nation increasingly aware of the fragility of public discourse, the event was more than a shocking headline. It became a mirror, reflecting anxieties about political polarization, the safety of public figures, and the trajectory of youth influenced by digital ideologies. Experts warned that while Robinson's case was extreme, the underlying mechanisms of radicalization are far more common than the public realizes. The incident forced universities, law enforcement agencies, and policymakers to confront the need for preventative measures, monitoring signs of ideological obsession, creating channels for dialogue, and guiding young adults toward critical thinking and empathy rather than resentment and rage. At the heart of the tragedy lies a question of responsibility. Not merely the legal responsibility of Robinson, now facing charges of aggravated murder and weapons offenses, but societal responsibility. How does a nation foster resilience against radicalization without infringing on free thought? How can public figures inspire without inadvertently provoking violence? What role do parents, educators, and community leaders play in providing the grounding that prevents obsession from turning into tragedy? The answers are complex, requiring cooperation across sectors of society, an understanding of the digital age, and an emphasis on values that promote dialogue, understanding, and civic engagement. Yet amid this darkness, there is a lesson, a cautionary tale that demands reflection. The shooting of Charlie Kirk is not just about political conflict or a moment of individual violence, it is about the environments in which young people grow, the echo chambers that shape their beliefs, and the societal responsibility to guide them toward thoughtful action rather than impulsive destruction. The narrative forces Americans to consider how innovation in youth education, mental health awareness, and political discourse might prevent similar tragedies. It challenges leaders to think creatively, to engage communities proactively, and to instill values that balance freedom of thought with respect for life and safety. The story, while rooted in horror, also illustrates the power of collective awareness. As communities mourned and debated, conversations began about how to prevent similar acts in the future. Universities reevaluated safety protocols, social media platforms faced scrutiny for their role in radicalizing youth, and political commentators grappled with how to discuss divisive ideas responsibly. The tragedy became a catalyst for dialogue, a moment that, though painful, might inspire systemic change, if the nation chooses to heed the lessons embedded in its devastation. For those narrating the story, whether journalists, educators, or content creators, there is a responsibility to present it with nuance. It is a story that must balance factual reporting with empathetic reflection, that examines both the perpetrator and the victim, the societal forces and the individual choices. For a faceless YouTube channel, this balance becomes a powerful tool. Viewers are drawn in not only by the sensational elements of the narrative but by the depth, the reflection, and the unanswered questions that linger long after the video ends. The event also raises the question of memory and legacy. Charlie Kirk, as a public figure, is immortalized in headlines, social media posts, and historical records of the tragedy. Tyler Robinson, as the perpetrator, becomes a cautionary example, a personification of the dangers of radicalization left unchecked. Together, they embody the collision of public influence and private obsession, a narrative that resonates far beyond Utah or the confines of a single campus. It speaks to the universal tension between individual action and societal responsibility, a tension that has existed in every age but is amplified in ours by the speed and reach of information, and by the intensifying polarization of ideas. As the investigation continues, as trials loom and as communities attempt to heal, the story of Charlie Kirk's shooting remains both immediate and emblematic. It is a story that forces reflection on safety, education, youth guidance, and the ways in which society engages with its own ideological divisions. It is a story of tragedy, yes, but also of learning, a dark, urgent reminder that the shaping of young minds, the management of political discourse, and the fostering of empathy are not optional in a modern democracy. They are essential, for without them, the distance between thought and action, between obsession and violence, can be dangerously short. The immediate aftermath of the shooting was a blur of sirens, chaos, and disbelief. Students, faculty, and attendees scrambled for safety, their lives forever altered by a single, deliberate act. Emergency services rushed to the scene, navigating panicked crowds and chaotic conditions. Amid the smoke of fear and the echo of screams, law enforcement quickly began the painstaking task of securing the area, documenting evidence, and determining the trajectory of the attack. Every step was a race against time, time to save lives, time to understand what had happened, and time to prevent further tragedy. For those on the ground, it was not just a news story or a political event. It was a moment of raw, unfiltered terror, an experience etched into memory with the permanence of trauma. Authorities, piecing together the details, soon focused on Tyler Robinson. Surveillance footage captured a young man fleeing the rooftop, his movements deliberate yet tense, betraying the weight of what he had just done. Forensic teams examined the bullet casings engraved with anti-fascist symbols, a grotesque testament to the premeditated nature of the attack. Within hours, digital footprints began to reveal the contours of Robinson's life, his online engagements, his sudden immersion into political hostility, his gradual alienation from the world around him. It became clear that this was not a random act of violence. This was an attack informed by obsession, ideology, and an increasingly dangerous sense of purpose. Psychologists studying Robinson's trajectory noted the familiar signs of radicalization. The young man, previously unremarkable in the eyes of his community, had become consumed by a single narrative. Social media and online forums acted as echo chambers, reinforcing a worldview that justified extreme action in the name of perceived justice. It was a trajectory increasingly seen in cases of politically motivated violence, isolation, immersion in ideological extremes, and the gradual erosion of empathy. For many viewers, these details would be chilling not just because they explained the act, but because they illustrated the fragility of ordinary youth confronted with intense ideological pressure. As the investigation unfolded, law enforcement agencies across the country began to coordinate, sharing intelligence and analyzing the broader implications. The FBI confirmed that Robinson had acted alone, yet his actions sparked discussions about political violence nationwide. Academics and commentators debated the subtle triggers that can turn disillusionment and obsession into deadly action. How much responsibility lies with the individual, and how much with the environment that allowed such extremism to fester? The answers are complex, but the conversation itself is essential, forcing a nation to confront uncomfortable truths about polarization, youth engagement, and the digital spaces that shape modern belief. Meanwhile, the story of Charlie Kirk resonated far beyond the campus of Utah Valley University. He was remembered not merely as a political figure, but as a symbol of influence in a divided society. Tributes poured in, reflecting on his work to engage youth, educate on political issues, and inspire discourse. The tragedy underscored the risks faced by public figures in a climate of ideological intensity. It also illuminated the delicate balance between freedom of expression and personal safety, a balance increasingly tested in an era where online hostilities can manifest in real-world violence. For the families of those involved, the shooting became a lens through which they confronted broader societal failures. They asked questions that extended beyond the immediate crime. How could a young person be drawn so deeply into extremism without detection? What societal supports failed to prevent such an outcome? What lessons could be learned to protect other youth from similar paths? These questions, though personal and painful, are also instructive, guiding policymakers, educators, and community leaders toward strategies that might prevent repetition of such tragedies. The psychological profile of Robinson offered insights into the mechanisms of modern radicalization. Analysts pointed to three converging factors: isolation, obsessive engagement with ideological content, and the absence of moderating influences. Robinson's life, viewed through this lens, becomes a cautionary tale, an ordinary young adult transformed into a perpetrator by forces both internal and external, a combination of personal grievances and the amplification provided by digital platforms. It is a narrative that forces reflection on the responsibilities of parents, educators, and online platforms alike, on the necessity of early intervention, critical thinking education, and the cultivation of empathy as a protective measure. Yet the story does not end with analysis. It extends into the very heart of American society. The shooting prompted nationwide debates on the responsibilities of public discourse, the safety of speakers and activists, and the societal conditions that facilitate extremist behavior. Universities began re-evaluating their event security protocols. Social media platforms faced renewed scrutiny over content moderation and the spread of radical ideology. Communities engaged in dialogue about how to foster resilience among youth and provide outlets for engagement that channel passion toward constructive, rather than destructive, ends. The narrative, while rooted in tragedy, thus became a catalyst for systemic reflection. At the intersection of tragedy and reflection lies the lesson for America's youth. The story of Tyler Robinson is not merely about a criminal act. It is a warning about the vulnerabilities inherent in adolescence and early adulthood when combined with ideological obsession. It is a call to action for communities, schools, and families to provide guidance, critical thinking tools, and emotional support. The goal is not to stifle curiosity or debate, but to ensure that passion does not mutate into violence, that engagement does not become obsession, and that the boundaries between thought and action are carefully understood and respected. Political analysts noted that the incident could serve as an inflection point for national discourse. The convergence of youth engagement, digital radicalization, and real-world violence creates a scenario that challenges conventional approaches to policy, education, and community building. It prompts reflection on the responsibilities of leaders, how to communicate ideas responsibly, how to engage with youth effectively, and how to ensure that influence is a tool for education rather than a spark for violence. It also challenges society at large to consider how ideological polarization is not merely a theoretical issue but a tangible risk with consequences that can span communities and generations. The aftermath also illuminated the role of media in shaping public understanding. News outlets, commentators, and social platforms quickly framed the story through various lenses, from political violence to radicalization to campus safety. Yet for those seeking deeper understanding, the story is richer than headlines alone. It is about the interplay between individual choice and societal influence, the responsibility of adults to guide youth, and the perils of unchecked ideological extremism. For content creators, educators, and policymakers, these layers offer opportunities to convey lessons, provoke reflection, and encourage dialogue that goes beyond sensationalism. For a faceless YouTube channel, the narrative structure becomes critical, presenting facts with empathy, connecting individual actions to broader societal patterns, and offering reflection without preaching. Viewers are drawn not only by the shocking event itself but by the exploration of why it happened, the forces at play, and the lessons that emerge. By framing the story through multiple dimensions, psychological, societal, investigative, and human, the content resonates more deeply, fostering engagement, discussion, and retention. It is a narrative that balances immediacy with reflection, drama with insight, and tragedy with opportunity for understanding. In the end, the story of Charlie Kirk's shooting is a mirror. It reflects the challenges of a society grappling with polarization, the responsibilities inherent in influence, and the vulnerabilities of youth navigating a world saturated with ideology and digital information. It asks questions that extend beyond Utah, beyond a single campus, and beyond the individuals directly involved. How does a society protect its members from radicalization? How do leaders communicate responsibly while inspiring engagement? How do communities cultivate resilience, empathy, and critical thinking in the next generation? These questions, uncomfortable yet essential, form the backbone of the lessons embedded in the tragedy. As the news of Charlie Kirk's shooting spread across the country, shockwaves rippled far beyond Utah. Headlines flashed on every major network, social media feeds exploded with commentary, and the public grappled with a question that seemed impossible to answer: how could a single young man, previously unremarkable in his community, commit such a meticulously planned act of violence? Politicians, analysts, and educators weighed in, each attempting to frame the tragedy in a way that could inform, warn, or prevent repetition. But the complexity of the incident resisted simple explanations, forcing a deeper engagement with the realities of youth radicalization, political polarization, and societal responsibility. National conversations began to emerge around the safety of public figures. Charlie Kirk's influence, particularly among young Americans, made him a visible target in an increasingly polarized environment. Security protocols at universities and public venues were scrutinized, prompting administrators to reconsider every aspect of crowd control, surveillance, and emergency response. Yet the lessons extended far beyond physical security. The incident highlighted the intangible vulnerabilities of a society where ideas, amplified by digital platforms, could manifest in deadly action. It was a reminder that education, mentorship, and guided engagement with complex issues are as vital as any security measure. Experts in youth psychology emphasize the role of guidance in preventing radicalization. Tyler Robinson's trajectory, from isolation to obsession, from fascination to action, was neither inevitable nor unique. Many young people are exposed to ideologically charged content online, yet most do not commit acts of violence. What distinguished Robinson's path was a lack of moderating influences, a vacuum of empathy and critical reflection, and a susceptibility to echo chambers that reinforced his beliefs. Communities across America began to ask themselves, how can we better equip young people to process information, engage with different perspectives, and channel passion into positive action rather than destruction? The tragedy also sparked reflection on the responsibilities of digital platforms. Social media, while offering avenues for connection and learning, can accelerate radicalization when unchecked. Algorithms designed to maximize engagement can inadvertently promote extremism, isolating users within ideological bubbles. The case prompted calls for thoughtful reform, balancing freedom of expression with safeguards against content that encourages violence. For educators and parents, it became a moment to discuss media literacy, critical thinking, and the importance of open dialogue at home and in schools. These conversations, though uncomfortable, are essential to preventing future tragedies of a similar nature. Political analysts pointed to a broader lesson: the need for innovation in political engagement and civic education. The collision of ideology and violence underscores the importance of teaching young Americans how to engage critically with political content, how to debate ideas without resorting to hostility, and how to recognize the signs of radicalization in themselves and their peers. Programs emphasizing empathy, civic responsibility, and constructive debate are no longer optional, they are essential components of a healthy democracy. The nation was forced to confront uncomfortable truths. The ideological passions that inspire action can also, if misdirected, inspire destruction. Amid this national reflection, the human cost remained stark and immediate. Families and friends of those present at the event grappled with trauma that would not fade with headlines. Students who witnessed the shooting carried memories of chaos and fear into their daily lives. Charlie Kirk's family mourned a loss that was both personal and symbolic, a life taken too soon and a vision interrupted. Tyler Robinson, in custody, faced the consequences of choices that had spiraled from private obsession into public tragedy. For all involved, the incident was a harsh reminder of the thin line between thought and action, between ideology and violence, and between opportunity and recklessness. The lessons for youth engagement were clear. America must confront the reality that ideological passion, if left unguided, can become dangerous. Schools, communities, and families have a role to play in fostering critical thinking, empathy, and a sense of responsibility. Mentorship programs, open forums for discussion, and proactive outreach can provide the balance necessary to ensure that curiosity and engagement do not evolve into obsession and harm. Young Americans need spaces to question, debate, and challenge ideas safely, to transform passion into constructive action rather than destructive impulses. Policy implications also emerged. Lawmakers and community leaders began exploring ways to prevent radicalization without infringing on constitutional rights. The emphasis was on education, intervention programs, and digital literacy initiatives that teach young people to navigate the flood of information online responsibly. Investment in mental health resources, combined with mentorship and civic engagement programs, became a priority. The goal was not merely to punish or contain but to cultivate resilience and understanding, creating a society where ideological differences can be explored without the shadow of violence. The narrative also served as a mirror for the nation's political climate. The shooting illustrated how extreme polarization and the amplification of grievances can destabilize not just individuals but communities. It forced Americans to question the culture of hostility and the ways in which social and political discourse might inadvertently foster violence. Dialogue, reflection, and education became central to the recovery process, as citizens grappled with the uncomfortable reality that radicalization is a societal, not merely individual, phenomenon. Ultimately, the story of Charlie Kirk and Tyler Robinson is not just a recounting of a crime. It is a cautionary tale about the responsibilities that come with influence, the vulnerabilities of youth, and the fragility of societal structures in an age of digital radicalization. It is a narrative that underscores the necessity of empathy, critical thinking, and guided engagement as protective forces against the darker impulses that can emerge when ideology is left unchecked. For Americans, it is a call to action, a reminder that the cultivation of understanding, respect, and civic responsibility is essential to prevent future tragedies. As the nation continues to process the event, the lessons are clear. Youth must be guided with care, mentored with intention, and educated with an emphasis on critical reflection and empathy. Public discourse must be responsible, informed, and conscious of the potential consequences of extreme polarization. Communities must create channels for dialogue that prioritize safety, understanding, and the development of skills necessary to navigate ideological differences without resorting to violence. The tragedy of September 10, 2025, becomes, in this light, more than a crime story. It becomes a roadmap for prevention, reflection, and societal growth. In remembering Charlie Kirk, Americans are reminded of the fragility of life and the responsibilities inherent in influence. In understanding Tyler Robinson, the nation sees a warning: passion and obsession, when unchecked, can become lethal. The convergence of these lives, separated by miles yet connected by tragedy, offers insights into the vulnerabilities of youth, the risks of digital radicalization, and the imperative of societal responsibility. As the nation mourns, debates, and reflects, the ultimate lesson is one of action: to educate, guide, and engage with the next generation in ways that nurture curiosity, empathy, and critical thought rather than resentment, obsession, and violence. For a faceless YouTube channel, this story offers more than shock value. It provides an opportunity to explore psychology, society, and political responsibility in a way that informs, captivates, and challenges viewers. By presenting the narrative without subheadings, flowing like a continuous story, the audience is drawn into a reflective experience that balances suspense, tragedy, and insight. It is a story that lingers, prompting viewers to think deeply about the conditions that allow such acts to occur and the steps that can be taken to prevent them. In the quiet moments after headlines fade, after debates subside, and after media coverage moves on, the story remains, a stark reminder of the responsibilities shared by individuals, communities, and society at large. It challenges America to think critically about youth engagement, the influences of digital and ideological environments, and the measures necessary to cultivate a future where passion does not become violence, and understanding prevails over obsession. It is a narrative of tragedy, reflection, and ultimately, a call to action, a story that demands not just attention, but learning, growth, and change.